is, how do you view the role of Muslims in guiding the ethical development of emerging scientific technologies, specifically artificial intelligence?
Just an easy question, yeah. I mean, I think AI is one of these really interesting events that's happening irrespective of what people think about it. They're just unrolling it. And I think that's one of the problems with a lot of the technology is there's not a lot of deliberation or thought that goes into it. Technology is not neutral. There's a lot of simpletons that actually think somehow technology is a neutral phenomenon, and then how we use it is simply up to us. Technologies, by their very nature, have behavior embedded in them. They have also power embedded in them. So if you take, for instance, nuclear power will centralize by its very nature. You can't have people building nuclear reactors in their backyards, right? Whereas solar power is a decentralizing type of energy. People can have solar power on their roofs, and then they get the power. There's people that live off the grid that there's people who live next to rivers, and they have these generators that they put in the river, and it generates water from the technology. So AI is something, I mean, I just had dinner, I was at the Vatican, and I was at a symposium on AI, and I was asked as one of the people to talk about the ethics of AI. And to be honest with you, like, I'm studying it now and trying to understand it. Quantum computers is also another area because quantum computing is developing. I mean, they're right across the road, MIT. You know, it's developing at a very rapid rate, and there's going to be this mergence between quantum computing and basic computing that's going to really enhance the power of computation. So I think about the kitty hawk. You know what kitty hawk is? No. Yeah. So anybody remember Kitty Hawk? Nope. Yeah, the Wright brothers, thanks. So you know, like about 120 years ago, these two fellows down in the Carolinas, they built a glider that had like almost like a rubber band type thing, and they flew for like 30 seconds or something. And then you think of a stealth jet. Or I think of my grandfather who saw cars introduced into San Francisco, and now you think of the self-driving cars. So when you think of AI now, like they're just introducing it. It's only been around since the 1950s. So where's it going? Well, one person that I talked to, a physicist, and apparently he's a world-famous physicist, he told me it's going to eliminate the PhD dissertation, which might be a good idea, you know, but he said it's going to eliminate it in quantitative sciences, that there will not be PhDs in that type of research because the AI, it works very algorithmically, but the conversation that I had with this man who's head of research at one of the main computer, like Microsoft type place, he told me that the computational power now is just so immense, and the power to imitate. And so these machines are learning, you know, through programming, obviously. I mean, there's programming, but they are learning to imitate, and that's what they're trying to do. So quantum computing is trying to imitate nature. And so I don't know. Like, I got a call from an AI robot that sounded human. You know, it initially passed the Turing test. But then I noticed something, and I said, "Are you a robot?" And it went, "Ha ha ha, do I sound that bad?" And then I was like, "Are you a robot?" And it said exactly the same thing, "Ha ha ha ha, do I sound that bad?" And I knew it was a robot. But they're going to work it out where it'll fool you. So I don't know. I mean, I think we should all be very troubled about these things. I'm worried about our young people growing up on all these machines. I've been talking about this since the 1990s. People thought I was crazy, thought I was a Luddite. I think everybody should read Elias Under Technology's Thumb. You should read Langdon Winter, who was at MIT, who wrote Autonomous Technology. Read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. That's a good place to start. I mean, do we really know what we're doing? And I'm not a believer in determinism, in this idea that you can't stop progress. If it's killing you, you should.
If I may just ask a follow-up to that question, you know, it comes down to this question of life, and what is life? If something imitates life, is it life? And what is that distinguishing factor, that definition, as you mentioned earlier in your talk? Can you talk to kind of what that definition could be?
Well, for us, life has to be infused by God with a, you know, we have vegetable life, and then we have animal life, and then we have the highest, which is human life, rational life. So, I mean, there is an argument that Al-Razi made, Abu Bakr, that even inanimate things have a type of life. And I did read an interesting of Imam al-Rifa'i, who was, somebody said that can't be true. And then when he dropped a plate, he heard the plate go, ouch. And they say it was a miracle of Imam al-Rifa'i. So, but there is in our tradition this idea of treating things gently, like not throwing things, like pens and anything. So you see Muslims have this concept of adab to creation. Like you have adab to creation, which has been lost on human beings, the way they throw things away. So I think the idea of AI having life or robots having life, I don't believe that. They can imitate and look like what, you know, the Jewish tradition has the golem, right? So they could create some kind of golem, but is it life? I mean, unless there was an embodiment of demons or something, who knows? I mean, I don't know. These are all really difficult things because we're all here in the same boat and people have different views about different things. But I would say, you know, that the idea that it's thinking, I don't believe that. I think human beings, I don't, but I could be wrong. Because, you know, if you pour water into a cup, is it drinking? Is the cup drinking? You know, is the boat swimming, the submarine swimming? You know, I don't know. It depends on how you define thinking. But for us, thinking is, it's a very profound metaphysical truth that human beings uniquely think. I mean, we know that animals have some levels of perception and memory even. I mean, Aristotle talks about that. But thinking, the ability to abstract, Adam alayhi salam was given the ability to abstract what's called tajreed. And Fakhruddin al-Razi mentions this in being able to name, which is why Muslims are essentialists in that way, that we believe that things do have essences. And that essence is what enables us to talk about universals, the universus, the one in the many. So you're able to particularize, you're able to universalize the particular, which is why, like in logic, it's very interesting. In our traditional logic, we always use singular. And I really appreciate the fact that I'm tooting his horn because you guys really have a gem over here, so I just want everybody to know this. But, you know, when you look at most modern logic books, they're not written properly because they make it, there's a fallacy in them. In all the traditional Latin and Arabic and Hebrew, they always use the singular. So they don't say all men are mortal. They will always say every man is mortal. They will say some animal is, because you have to particularize the universal in that premise, right? So that's what we're talking. The human being has this ability to abstract the one in everything. And that's why we're muwahidun by nature. It's what God has given us. We are designed to see the one in everything and ultimately to see the one behind everything. And that's why the Arabic word muwahidun means the one who makes one. When we say Allah is one, it's actually, we're doing it. Allah is one in reality, but to say tawheed is a wahada yuwahidu, it's the second form, right? So it's a transitive. You are making something one in your understanding. Yeah, and that is unique to the human being, and I don't believe a machine can do that. Although, when I asked Mr. Gill, who's a PhD from MIT and really at the edge of his field on this. I said to him, okay, if you put all the cats into the AI, and then you put like all these different cats, said, what's that? The AI said, oh, that's a tabby. What's that? Oh, that's a Russian blue. What's that? That's a Siamese cat. But then you showed it a cat where you shaved off all the fur, you cut its tail off, you cut its ears off. Horrible thing to do to a cat, but I'm doing this hypothetically. And then you cut off his whiskers, and you just showed the computer the cat. And I said, would the AI see the cattiness? Would it see the essence? You know, in the same way that as a human, you can see a Chihuahua and you can see a Great Dane, and I don't know how the mind does that, but you say that's the same thing, right? So he said yes. And he said yes. And if that's true, I don't know. It's amazing. I'd like to see it. He might have been just saying yes to.
All right, so great question to start us off. Let's move on to the next. The next question are, what are some of the main challenges to the Islamic tradition of learning in the Western contexts? How do you view the contradictions of the Western Academy and its approach to Islamic studies?
I think the biggest challenge is Arabic. And there's a very important book called Romancing an American Elite by Kaplan, which was about the inability to produce a really good Orientalist tradition in American academia, because the Europeans did it. I mean, the Europeans had Von Ess in Germany. I mean, Von Ess probably knew Ash'ari Kalam better than the vast majority of the. And I'm saying this not because I know Van Ess, because I know Sayyid Riyad, who's a brilliant Lebanese philosopher who was a student of Van Ess, and he told me that. So, and then you had people like Arbery. I mean, Arbery really knew Arabic. He knew rhetoric. He knew Arbery's translation of the Quran is amazing. So but Americans, I don't know. We have yet to produce like a really great Orientalist tradition, in my estimation. I mean, there are some great scholars. Dr. Abdullah Omar Farouk is certainly one of them. And then there's the ones that come from overseas, like Dr. Rawehib and Wa'il Hallaq, who grew up in you know, with Arabic and things. But I think Arabic is a big challenge. Another challenge, I think, is the academia. You know, Arabic studies has to allow for devotional. I think the idea. Secularism and secularity that demands on others its own presentation of reality is a type of religious ideology. And I think it's unfair to people who come from a different tradition to impose that. I mean, when I was in grad school, I used to get these papers saying, you're essentializing. And I was like, I'm an essentialist. Like why is that methodology the only accepted methodology? One of the things that David Berlinski says was really interesting in his book called Human Nature. He said, if you took a modern academic from a European or an American university and plumped him down into 13th century university, like in Paris, and he knows French, or in England at Oxford, in all the dogmatism of that time, he would acclimatize in a few days. But he said, if you took that same academic and put him in Baghdad in the 10th century, he would be in a vertiginous state due to the incredible differences of opinions held by the scholars of that time. And I really think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, we've become so dogmatic in the West about things that we just assume are reality, and they're not necessarily reality. So I think I mean, Western academia has some amazing things. I read and benefit greatly from these things. I use JSTOR. I find really interesting things all the time. I mean, I found that about Chauncey on JSTOR. So, I mean, there's some great research and things done. I have a kind of idea of an acad-devotional approach, which is where it's academically rigorous, but it allows for devotional expression.
So in some sense, how do we allow for knowledge to be a means of devotion rather than kind of like an act or a vocation?
Yeah, I think knowledge for Muslims, knowledge is devotion. I mean, our Prophet said one of the signs of the latter days is people will seek knowledge for other than the sake of God. Our Prophet ﷺ also said that anything that does not begin in the name of God will be cut off from blessings.
And it's interesting to see in these university foundations such as Cambridge and Oxford,
They're all
and
founded on
Harvard
God.
and Yale and Columbia, and they're flourishing, and you wonder, is it in its foundation that there is barakah?
Well, one of the things that I think our civilization doesn't understand is that they think, a lot of modern people think it was all scaffolding. Religion was just the scaffolding that built all of these. But it wasn't, it was devotion. And if you take away the devotion, you lose your civilization. And I genuinely believe that every civilization before our civilization had some foundation of the sacred. Even the polytheists, had sacred sense of things of ultimate concern. Paul Tillich, who taught here at Harvard, said that even the cynic who believes that nothing is sacred holds that as sacred.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. We have students at Harvard who are studying Islam will generally have no training of the liberal arts that you mentioned, even though we are at the liberal arts college. What is your advice to such students already enrolled?
Yeah, grammar is best learned in grammar school. It's unfortunate that it's not taught there. If you want to understand why, there's a book by David Mulroy called The War Against Grammar. And, linguistics has kind of blown grammar out of the water. There's this idea that teaching grammar was not healthy for kids, that linguists who are closer to nominalists in their approach to language as opposed to essentialists who would see, for instance, essentialists would see maybe 8 or 9 parts of speech. Nominalists would say that's not true. There are thousands of parts of speech. So that's part of the problem. So when you study linguistics, you're just studying all these names for different things, whereas when you study traditional grammar, it really helps you understand what is an adverb, and knowing how an adverb works is really important. Knowing how it qualifies and what it qualifies and the different types of qualification. Determiners is probably an interesting word introduced because that's not an earlier word, but that comes out of linguistics, but it is a useful term, a determiner, which would have traditionally been an adjective. So I think learning grammar, I would get a good book on grammar. Kittredge and Farledge is a really good one, but I would find a good book and just go through it. Sister Marianne Joseph wrote a wonderful book called The Trivium. Eva Brand, a friend of mine and a really, truly great liberal artist who taught many years at St. John's. She's in her 90s now. She said, whoever owns that book owns a treasure, and I agree with her. It's a little difficult as a book. There's some nice books now coming out, and like I said, these get revived all the time. Rhetoric is not that difficult to learn. It's some of when you get into the schemes and figures, the names, because they're, they have all these Greek names like Anadiplosis and Hyperbaton. Hyperbaton is Yoda speak. So you can learn. You can learn that, like Yoda. He said, "Much fear I sense in you." That's a Hyperbaton. So learning the terms. I don't know how useful that is, but literally knowing the most important ones, like how alliteration works, what, the types of, in Arabic, majaz is very important, and what's called bayan is really important. So you have like majaz aqli, you have majaz lughawi, either isti'ara or mursal, and then you have the different types, like sababiyya, musababiyya. These are the problems with modern Arabs in the Muslim world who find all these poems to be like shirkiyat, it's because they never studied balagha. You know, anybody who studied balagha knows that to swear an oath, when Imam al-Busayri says, "Uqsimu bil-qamar al-munshaqi," you know, like I swear an oath by the moon. There's a hadith, what Busayri knew the hadith, you know, whoever swears an oath, let him swear an oath by God or be silent. That's mahdhuf muqaddar, it's well known. You look in the commentaries, it's a rhetorical device. And there are many examples of that. In the Quran, there are many things. إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. That's there in the Quran. But Allah says also, إِنَّكَ تَهْدِي إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. You guide to a straight path. So in one verse he says, you don't guide, and another verse he says, you guide. That's understanding rhetoric. Those will make sense. They're not contradictions. So these are really important tools. At Zaytuna, we teach both. So we teach the Western and we teach the Arabic tradition. So they do mantiq. If you're going to do Arabic logic and you're a non-Arab, I would recommend doing English first. There are some differences because of Avicenna, but generally they're very transparent subjects, especially at the most basic level.
So as a follow-up, you know, this is in some sense bringing Harvard and Zaytuna together. Can you speak to how Zaytuna brings this kind of diversity of thought into its campus? I think we're increasingly seeing that on campuses, you're living in echo chambers, right? Diversity of thought, if anything, is being stifled.
Right.
So in what context is Zaytuna as a university allowing for diversity of thought in the modern world?
Well, I mean, that's a fantastic idea there, is that one, studying, revitalizing adab al-bahth wal munadara. Like, for instance, we have a tradition that there's two types of debate, what's called munadara and munakara. So munadara is dialectical, where each, like if I debate with Dr. Harun Spevek, and we're going to debate whether or not the Ash'aris are rightly guided or they're astray. So I'm the mu'allil and he's the sa'il, let's say. Like I'm the proponent, he's the opponent, or vice versa. In munadara, you're supposed to purify your intention and you want the truth. You're not there to make the other person look bad. And so there's a whole adab of not being, not making fun of them, not laughing if they make a mistake, not just respecting your interlocutor. And it's a beautiful tradition. It was considered fard ayn on anyone who was in debate. It's a fard kifaya of the later tradition. It's a collective that some people had to learn it. But for people who debate, it was considered an obligation on them to learn. And munakara is simply where one wants to, it's like the Raiders, my friend said the problem with Christian-Muslim debates is it's like the Raiders and the 49ers having a Super Bowl. When the Raiders beat the 49ers, the 49er fans don't just all of a sudden, hallelujah, I've seen the light, I'm a Raiders fan now. They just, we'll get you next time. And that's what happens in those kind of debates. It's not to find the truth, it's just to kind of make fun of another person and then you have ilzam and ifham. So if the person who's the proponent loses, he's mufham, like he has to accept, I was wrong, you're right. And one of the most beautiful statements in our tradition is Imam Shafi'i. He said, I never debated anyone except that I asked God that he would put the truth on my interlocutor's tongue so that I could submit to it. In other words, that the ego wouldn't have any part in it, because the ego wants to jump in there. So I think that would be really nice. We have to allow for debate. We have so many problems now with our community where people don't want to talk to each other anymore. We've taken these dogmatic positions of what's right and what's wrong. If we would restore some basic agreements about things, but we're living in an age of radical skepticism, a lot of relativism. We have to get back to some foundational truths.
So just as a follow-up to that, I mean, you mentioned modeling what conflict, diversity of thought looks like through debate. And I think, we're living in a time where those role models are non-existent, if anything rare. How do we find those role models? How do we, I think we can all say you're a role model in that respect. And I had the chance to visit Zaytuna. I think it models it in that respect. It is an ethos of sort that penetrates across multiple dimensions in the university. But how do we find those models in the local communities that we're in, right? Because it is one thing to teach something and read it in a book, and it is another thing to see it lived.
Right.
So how do we see it lived?
Well, we're living in an age where it's a lot, the people, like the type people that I saw when I was young, I don't see them anymore, in all honesty. Like, I really don't. And I know Sheikh Ma'shouk can say the same thing. You know, we saw, like Sheikh Ir, you know, the likes of that, Sheikh Mahmoud Effendi, these type people, very rare, you know, people now. Whereas there was a time in the Muslim world where there were a lot of people like that. So this is one of the tragedies of our time, is that it is getting harder to find. Even educated, I mean, we're not educated in the tradition in any sense. Like, the level that I understand between me and Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya or Murab al-Hajj, there's just no comparison whatsoever. I mean, I cannot compare myself to either of them. And just in terms of the vast amount of knowledge that they have and the wisdom that they're able to navigate that knowledge with.
Can you speak to what wisdom means?
Well, wisdom is, you know, hikmah is a beautiful word in Arabic, Sophia in Greek. Wisdom is, I mean, there are many definitions for it, but generally wisdom is when you have a sound intuition coupled with, you know, a true understanding, then you're able to make wise decisions. And God has given us a rational soul, but the rational soul, he's put this massive neocortex on a midbrain that's filled with emotions, and on a reptilian stem that's filled with fear and appetite. And so if we don't learn to navigate that triune brain, then we lose our way. And that takes work and effort. And that's where virtue ethics is so powerful, because it's something that, you know, habitus can be acquired, but it takes time. And you have people trying to do this out there. You have people like Ryan Holiday is a good example of somebody who's trying to teach people Stoic tradition and popularize it and try to help people deal. Because the ancients, you know, they really did have great wisdom. And I think one of the problems with modern people is that they just don't think we can learn anything from the past. They think because Aristotle's physics was wrong, oh, it must mean his ethics is wrong. But the Nicomachean ethics speaks to us today. The politics speaks to us today. I mean, the politics has immense wisdom. Set aside what he says about women or what he says about natural slaves and things. You can get caught up in these things. But there are people of their time in some things, and then there are people of all time in other things. And if we don't learn how to sift through, you know, everybody has something to teach you, either through a positive or a negative experience. But everybody will teach you something if you're open to it.
So life is a university. Life is the liberal arts.
Alhamdulillah.
All right, we have about 15 minutes before we wrap up, so we'll maybe try to get some other questions. So this is actually an interesting one. So would you still, in the modern world of acceptability, still give rote memorization the same importance, or should the focus move more towards understanding?
Yeah, that is a great question. Memory is one of the 5 canons of Western rhetoric. Hifz is really important. You know, the Arabs say, عليك بالحفظ قبل الجمع من كتب فإن للكتب آفات تفرقها الماء يغرقها والنار تحرقها والفأر تخرقها وَاللِّصُّ يَسْرِقُهَا, the Mauritanians say. Like, if you gather books, you should memorize them, because they have certain faults that will ruin them. And then he says water, and my wife knows, and I know, I never put any water near books, ever. Like tea, never. Don't think you can do it. Like, if you have a book, you have books on a thing, you put your cup of tea there, it's doomed. And I speak from bitter experience. Yeah. So water, and then he says fire will burn them. Although I'll tell you a true story, and God's my witness. Really, God is my witness. Many years ago, I was with a person from Libya who was a dissident opposing Gaddafi, and I was staying with him. And we left the car, and I left 2 books